All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Cooking with Kole. I'm going to give people a few minutes to log in. Welcome back. I hope everyone's staying warm on this chilly January morning. Here at the library, we are open. We're open every day, 10 to 7, Monday through Thursday, 10 to 5, Friday and Saturday, and 1 to 5 on Sundays. We have resumed our passport service on Wednesdays and Saturdays. It's by appointment only. And starting in February, we will only be booking a week in advance. So if you have any questions, please call our information desk and they can help you make an appointment or answer any questions you have about that process. I know we have a lot on the stove already, so I don't want to delay any further. So I'm going to turn this over to Kole, who will be making ricotta balls today.
Yes. So today like all of us, it's been so stinking cold lately, and I have been defaulting to really simple but incredibly flavorful Italian recipes. And so when I was thinking about what I wanted to do this week, I thought it would be fun to do a spin on the meatball. And so what we're going to be doing today is, like Ruth has said, ricotta meatballs, but also we're going to be making ricotta from scratch. And that sounds really daunting. It sounds kind of like a lengthy, intense process. I promise you, it could not be simpler. It's very easy. So we're making our own ricotta. We're also making ricotta meatballs. And then to accompany that, we are doing just a simple Italian sort of pasta dish that's called Pastina Soup. And really, it's just any broth of your choice. I think veggie or chicken broth probably goes best. And then you can do we're pairing that with some couscous and then just a simple aromatic oil on top. We're using the same recipe that we did for my ramen class. So all of these things should seem fairly familiar. And though it looks like a daunting situation happening on my stove, there's just lots of moving parts, but like we're gonna get this done super quickly. So some housekeeping things that we have going on here in this biggest pot. This is what I had to prep a little bit before the class. This is gonna be our ricotta cheese. And so in here is a half gallon of whole milk. Ideally, you want something that's not ultra pasteurized. You just want regularly pasteurized. So when you're going to select at the grocery store, all you need to look out for is just the single pasteurized, the ultra pasteurized. It can be used to make ricotta cheese, but I find that your yield of the cheese is just not going to be as high. And that's because it's just been really refined and processed. And so we want something just under that, but is also safe to eat and drink. So pasteurized is the way to go. And then in there, I have also added in 1/3 cup of heavy cream. It needs to be heavy cream and not half and half. Those are separate things, even though they're relatively close. You need all of those good fats in order to make our ricotta cheese today. And then also in here, I have 2.5 teaspoons of salt, just regular kosher salt. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. But really any salt will do, and that's just to give it a little bit of flavor, but also help with the solids of the cheese forming. And so right now I have this sort of on a medium, like just above medium on the stove here. And what I've done before class is I've heated this. Ideally, I'm aiming for the temperature for 200 degrees. So you do need a thermometer for this. You could use a meat thermometer. I'm using a candy thermometer, but really either one will do. And then everything else on here, I have lots of pots and pans. So I have a medium pot back here, and that is going to be our soup. And I just have some warm broth in there. And there is 2.5 cups of broth. It's just a really simple soup. And that's just kept on warm right now. And then I have a medium skillet, and you can't quite see it, but a smaller skillet behind this big pot. And that's what we're going to use to make our aromatic oil. So my milk mixture right here that has the whole milk and the cream and the salt. Right now I'm at 185. And so what I need to do sort of regularly is stir it. And there's a few pieces of advice when making this ricotta cheese. The first one is that when you go to pour all these ingredients together, you want to do it from cold. So I want the cold milk and the cold cream to go in together, and then you want to slowly heat that up so that it reaches 200 degrees. If you do it too quickly, a lot of times what you'll run into is it will scorch, which means that the bottom of the pan, some of those milk solids and proteins will burn just physically on the bottom. And then you get sort of like those dark things floating throughout. We want to try to avoid that. And then also what happens is because of the high fat content, there's sort of the skin that sometimes forms if you heat it up too quickly on top. And then that can mix in with your cheese. And so the best piece of advice that I would say is for about the first 15 minutes to go just to heat it up, probably just under medium heat, like a medium low situation would be good. And then right when it starts to reach that 135, 140 degree mark, then you can take it up to full medium heat or maybe just a little bit past. And then really stirring regularly is going to help you from burning the bottom, but then also having that skin form on top. And so I've been trying to nurse this throughout this past hour, trying to time it right so that the class would be ready in time. And so I'm basically there. And so I think I'll do in the meantime, as this is heating up, because I'm right there, I'm so close. I'm right at 190 right now. I'm going to start doing the garlic for our marinara sauce for our ricotta meatballs. So I have here 3 cloves of garlic. You can use more or less depending, and really whatever you like in marinara is going to be totally fine. But I'm just giving this a simple mince. It doesn't need to be anything crazy. And so we're looking for fairly small pieces with this. If you want more garlic flavor, I found that if you like really smush the garlic, for some reason that releases more of the aromatics in there. But if the garlic is sort of in a whole clove, you can see like that, it's not as loud or prominent a flavor. And I've been experimenting with that logic because I've heard it a few times and I didn't quite believe it. So it's like, that doesn't seem like it makes sense. Like garlic is garlic, right? It all acts the same. But it's true and it's crazy. So if you want more of a garlic flavor in your dish, really smash it. But if you want something that's a bit more muted, keep it whole. And if you just cut it, with a decent knife, it will still taste garlicky, but it just won't be as in your face. I find that absolutely fascinating. As always, if you have any questions or anything, feel free to type them in and I'll try to answer those as best I can. So here it is, just a simple mince, nothing too crazy. Hopefully you can see it on this camera. In this medium-sized skillet right here, I'm going to be adding, oh, it looks like we're at 200. So I'm actually gonna pause this process right now. Okay, so I'm gonna show you guys, hopefully, can you see this on film or on the screen?
Yeah, we have both of them spotlighted, so
Fantastic.
yeah, we can see it. Yeah.
Okay, so it's really hot. Hopefully I don't fog up the screen too bad.
You're good.
Okay, cool. So it's at 200 degrees. It happened quick, thank goodness. And then I have here 2.5 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. What you can also use is lemon juice, but it needs to be from a real lemon. You can also use white vinegar. I would stick to those 3. Anything else gets a little bit wonky. But you just need something that is really acidic, but also has a high citric acid content. And so most people have these on hand. It should be simple. So what I want to do, as you can see, is I am stirring this with one hand, and I want to very gradually sort of drip in that apple cider vinegar. And what you'll see on the screen, it's kind of exciting. I think it's cool. The curds will start to form almost immediately. It's really cool. So take a peek. You can see that it's just a really thin drizzle. So that is all the way in. Already, I hope that you can see. Do you see how on top here, the color is just starting to change? It's already starting to separate a little bit. I love that. That's so cool. So can you guys see on the camera how all of a sudden it almost looks, instead of like a singular white color, all of a sudden now it almost looks like fluffy clouds. And so
Yeah,
what's,
that
yeah, so what's happening right now is, I forget the exact nursery rhyme song, but like something about like the curds and whey, like that's what's happening right now. So the cheese that's forming right now is like these cheese curds. That's what these little wispy things are floating in on top. And then underneath it, that liquid, that is the whey. And fun fact, the whey, this liquid, a lot of times is separated and then that is sort of evaporated off. And that is what whey protein is. Nuts, right? So cheese making process is sort of a fairly sustainable loop, but that's just so cool. So what we're gonna do is I'll stir this every so often. The hard part with this is done, thank goodness. But I'm gonna let it sit for about 15 to 20 minutes. I was running a little bit late today, so I haven't preset my timers, but I'm gonna go ahead and do that right now. Sorry for the beeps. Okay, so we'll do 15 for that one, and I'm gonna set another timer for 20 minutes. And this timer is going to be for draining the cheese. And we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But right now on this larger skillet, we're just gonna let this thing out for 15 minutes. And then on this larger skillet, we're gonna get this garlic going. So I'm gonna go transfer this to the skillet here with a little bit of olive oil. I'm gonna just sort of eyeball it, but about 2 tablespoons or so would probably be fine. In the recipe, I wrote down, let's see, yep, 2 tablespoons, well, perfect. Pour this in here. And really, we don't need to go too crazy with the garlic. I was contemplating before the class to also make a homemade marinara. And I think I want to save that for the summertime when tomatoes are at their freshest. And this year, I'm finally doing a vegetable garden in our backyard, and I have all these fun different varieties of tomatoes that I want to use. So we're just going to put that on pause for another day. But for the garlic here, again, nothing crazy. We're just looking for it to be a little bit toasted. We're not looking for completely brown because it goes sort of bitter, and we want to avoid that. But just make sure that all of your garlic pieces are covered in oil. That's going to help create for an even cook, an even bake. And once it gets a little bit toasty and brown on the edges, we'll pour in some just store-bought marinara. Anything works. This container is, it looks like it's a pound. And really, realistically, you could probably go away with like a little bit more than a half pound. You don't exactly need the whole thing. But if you are really enthusiastic about marinara, use the whole thing. What does it matter? So our next step that we're going to do is we're going to make our aromatic oil for the soup, the pastina soup. And so an aromatic oil is really just a flavorful oil. They use it a lot of times in ramen dishes and Eastern dishes. And it's that oil, that sort of like glossy magic that sits a lot of times on top of soups. And it just smells fantastic. And it also adds a lot of flavor without necessarily being crazy complicated. And so, like I mentioned before class, we use the same aromatic oil recipe for ramen, and I find it just that good. So the recipe goes as follows. Actually, before I do this, I need for a little bit of avocado oil in this small skillet here. I'm using about 2 to 3 tablespoons. You just want enough that, because ultimately we're going to strain it and save that oil, and that sits on top of the soup. So we want just enough that is going to be not too crazy for the soup, but isn't too little either. So I think 2 to 3 tablespoons is just good. We need to heat that up. The heat setting I have is medium low, somewhere in between there. If it's too high, you cook the ingredients, and we don't necessarily want to do that. We just want to help encourage the aromatics and flavors to infuse into the oil, but we don't necessarily want to cook the vegetables, if that makes any sense. So I have here 5 green onions. They're also called scallions. I removed the roots from the ends, and we're just using the white bits. The white parts are the flavorful component of the onion. The green part, though you can eat it, it's more used for garnish and decoration. It has more of a mild flavor. And so we want mainly the green or the really bold flavor in the white parts of these green onions or scallions. And so what I always think is the thinner, the better. I'm just holding these together. Again, I have 5. And then right when there's that transition where it starts to fade into the green, when I don't see a whole lot of white in the center, that's when I'm going to stop. And so I'll show you kind of the transition that I'm looking for here. You can see that okay?
Yeah, we can see that. A little bit of green and the inner circle, but mostly white.
Yes, yep, exactly. So the rest of these, you can save them if you have a recipe that you want to use. Otherwise, you can just toss them. And I'm going to place these in the avocado oil. You also don't have to use avocado oil. Again, you can use any high heat oil, but what I love about it is though you pay a little bit more, it's very heart healthy. And so I just feel good about using that. Actually, I'm going to turn this up just a bit. I had it too low. Our garlic is smelling fantastic. Every Saturday when we do these, I swear, I get so stinking hungry. I love it. So the cheese is looking good. If you take a peek at this camera again, you can see that, a lot of it, like this cheese is, it's doing just fine. All of the cheese curds are mainly done. It just needs to cool down a little bit. On my timer, it says 9 minutes, so we're sitting really good. To our aromatic oil, I'm going to add in ginger. And to be honest, you can customize this. If you're not a huge fan of ginger, that's fine. You can also use lemongrass. That's kind of a fun aromatic to use. I really like ginger. I'm a big old fan, but it's a bold flavor. So if you're not into it, you can use less or just omit it entirely. We're just looking to infuse sort of bright flavors into our broth. That's gonna, not only do we get the savory aspect, but there's sort of like this brightening effect. And that I think is sort of a fun component to think about when making soups. So all I'm using is about 1.5 inches or so. And I'm cutting off the skin of the ginger. Don't need that. And one thing that makes an aromatic oil really effective is the more surface area whatever it is you're using comes in contact with the oil, the more flavor is going to come out of it, also using the appropriate temperature. So we have the temperature right, and now if I make fairly thin slices, then that means that I'm going to have more surface area for that ginger to seep in. So conversely, if you wanted not as loud of a flavor, just use a little bit larger chunks. That's kind of a fun thing to think about. And ultimately, we're going to discard these pieces anyway, so don't worry too much on having them be precise. But ginger is a fairly dense root, so you need a kind of a sharp knife. All right. Give these a stir. Gosh, it's smelling fantastic. So with the aromatic oil, what's kind of nice is if it's at a fairly low temperature, you can let it hang out on there for like 35 minutes. You can really make an intense, beautiful oil. The one thing though is you want to keep an eye on it, because if you start to see browning, you've sort of crossed a little bit into that category of infusing the oil, and now you're like cooking the thing. So just keep an eye on it and you should be good, and you can have just like the most mouth-watering aromatic oil ever. So I'm going to set this little piece of ginger aside. And the next step that I need to do is to pour in my marinara, because my garlic is done. Okay. So I've used, delicious, about, I would say, well, I guess almost the whole bottle, 3/4 of the bottle. And really, we just need this to get hot now, because this is what's going to cook our mozzarella balls. And so I'm going to give this a stir here, increase the heat to medium. And what we're looking for is that it's not necessarily boiling, we don't want that, but there needs to be sort of little bubbles along the top. We want it to be hot. So I'm going to incorporate all of this beautiful cooked garlic and some of that olive oil, give it in a mix. Well, pay attention to that. I'm going to increase the heat a little bit on my broth here. Again, it's just 2.5 cups of broth. And I guess now let's get going on making those mozzarella balls. It's crazy simple. So I need a bowl. I'm just gonna set this here. And in an ideal world, I try to think of like a timing where I could use the ricotta that I was making today for the ricotta balls, but it doesn't quite work. And so unfortunately, I have to use just like regular store-bought ricotta. But if you are excited to give this a try, it is truly this simple. You could just let this cool down and then you'd be all ready to use the ricotta that you made from scratch at home for your ricotta meatballs. How cool is that? So I need a spatula. And I'm going to use, I believe it's 15 ounces, so just under a pound of ricotta cheese. And then I think the whole fat is good. If you're worried about that, I think skim could be fine. It's just not going to be as meaty, if that makes any sense. And to this, I'm going to add in 1 egg. And the egg is going to act as a binder for everything. It's going to hold the cheese to give it its shape so those balls stay intact. And also, it's going to add a little bit of protein in there, which is cool. Over here. And you're just going to mix this in until everything is incorporated and homogeneous. And I think doing these 2 steps together, when it comes to like baking or cooking, you want to mix like with like first. So you do sort of all dry ingredients together, all wet ingredients. And what that does is it makes everything, when you go to mix both of them together, it's a lot more even and that the texture is consistent. And that's going to help make everything just taste better. The texture will be good. And hopefully these balls will stay intact and they don't just like dissolve into the marinara. That would be not good. Okay. So hopefully you can see here that the color has changed just a little bit. It's almost like slightly yellow, and that's from the egg yolk. I'm gonna check out my marinara sauce, give that another stir. Love it. Aromatic oil is looking good. Fabulous. Turn it down just a little bit. Okay. So to this, we're going to add in a 1/4 cup, or maybe it was a 1/2 cup, sorry. I have a 1/2 cup of Parmesan. And you can get kind of crazy with this. If you have the pecorino, that also works. I think here it is, 1/4 cup, okay. You can use a pecorino. You can switch this up really to whatever you like. But if you just straight old Parmesan, does the job. There we go. Okay. So that is a 1/2 cup. And then I'm also going to add in, and you kind of got to eyeball it. It says on the recipe that was sent out, a 1/2 cup of Italian breadcrumbs. And you might have to ultimately get to 3/4 cup. And what we're looking for consistency wise, I think it looks a little bit, or like the texture of cookie dough, where it's pretty thick. And it should be able to be worked with your hands because essentially we're forming meatballs just with ricotta. I need to turn down my marinara. It's really bubbling at me, but that's good. I want that. I wish you could smell it in here. It's so good. Fabulous. Cool.
Kole, I have a few questions when you have a minute.
Yeah, let's do it while I'm mixing this.
So, ginger in the aromatic oil, is that a bonus ingredient? I guess it wasn't in the recipe,
Oh, really?
but ginger is something that you measure with your heart, right? Like garlic and vanilla.
I think so, yes.
I agree.
So on my, it should be under the, I thought I sent it out, in the Pastina Soup recipe.
Okay.
It says 1.5 inches of ginger. Do you see that at all?
I am logging in to see what our emails look like. Give me just a moment. And then our second question, actually, we have three. How do you strain the whey from the homemade ricotta?
Yes, I will show you in 30 seconds, I guess, because it's done now. So I'm just gonna stop it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So I'll set this off to the side and we'll just do that really quick. I like this consistency so far. So what I have here, this is very DIY. I have a colander, and underneath that, just a big old bowl. And then on top of this, I have some cheesecloth. I just have a single layer. You can do more, but I'm trying to be thrifty. And one layer is just fine, to be honest. So what's gonna happen is I'm gonna pull out this thermometer. Love it. And then give this another little stir, making sure that if there's any cheese that's settled on the bottom, that it's catching that and it's sort of mixing around. And then I'm gonna try to do this without spilling on myself, but like I've yet to successfully achieve that. C'est la vie. We're gonna go ahead. I'm just gonna set this off to the side too. And you just pour it in. You wanna do it slowly because if you do it all at once, it's kind of gonna go everywhere. Like it is right now. Can you see it splashing? Oh, be mindful that the cloth stays up on the lip of the bowl or the colander. Oh man, it is just a little messy. Oh, I'm going overboard. Okay, so I'm leaking just a tad. So you can help encourage that because my bowl is honestly just not quite big enough. But if you just lift up the edges of the cheesecloth, if you do it really slow, it's good, but I'm just a little bit behind on time. So anyway, that's it. So what will happen is the cheese will stay on top, and then the whey is going to sink to the bottom. And so now I'm going to start my other timer. The longer you let this sit, the drier technically your cheese is going to be. And so with this, I just want it to be not terribly dry. You want some moisture, but also you don't want it to be too watery. And so I think waiting anywhere from 20 to 35 minutes is a good wait time. And you can sort of encourage that along a bit if you just lift up the edges of the cheesecloth, and that's going to help just very gently coax a bit more of that liquid out. And you can do this periodically as you're letting it sit.
Kole?
Yep.
About how much cheese does that yield?
I think about a pound. Yeah, about a pound of cheese. So a good chunk, I'll show you. So essentially one of those packages that I use, it makes essentially that same amount. And depending on the brand and the kind of milk that you use, that's gonna also play a factor in there. I find that if you want a little bit more, if you add, instead of like 3/4 cup of heavy cream, if you do a whole cup, you can get just a little bit more that way. But you don't want to use just pure cream. That would also be like crazy expensive. So whole milk, maybe a cup of cream if you want a little bit more. But yeah, do you guys want to see it again so far, or did you already get a good look at it?
Oh yeah, we can see it again.
Okay, well, you know what, I'm just gonna keep it. Isn't that fun?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's so interesting. While this is just hanging out and draining, we're gonna continue with, actually turn this down just a bit. We're gonna continue with our marinara I keep saying marinara, I'm sorry, or ricotta meatballs. So this texture looks pretty good. I'm happy with it. So it's a half cup of Parmesan and a half cup of Italian breadcrumbs. Oftentimes the grain of it is quite a bit smaller, and they also mix in just like the general Italian seasoning. It's really good, it's simple. And so what we're gonna add to this as our very last step is a little bit of basil. And if I've talked about basil before in the past, I'm just so jazzed about this hack that I found. If you cut the ends off of the stems of basil and you let it sit in water, it lasts like an extra week longer because it's essentially kind of like having flowers in a vase. It's that same mindset. I've always struggled with keeping basil alive, and like I've set it in the fridge, I've set it on the counter, it doesn't really work. But this does the trick, and I just let it hang out. And it's awesome. I've even like set it close to a window and roots will form, and like it almost like starts growing again. It's fantastic. So I am just having a small handful of basil. It's really aromatic. And we're just going to chiffonade, which means to very thinly ribbon the basil. And you just sort of clump it together and lightly roll it up. And I'm going for about an 1/8 or a 1/16 inch thin pieces. I'm giving it a quick little cut across the bias, and go ahead and mix that in there. I really like basil, but there's another recipe later this week that I want to try. And so I'm going to use the rest of it for that. So this is just a moderate amount. All right. So give this one more final mix. Gosh, it smells so good in here. Okay. I'm pretty happy with that. You don't want it to be too dry because then it won't stay together. So really make sure that like as you're adding it in to sort of figure out the consistency, because each brand of ricotta cheese, if you choose to not make it yourself, totally fine. But each brand is a little bit different in terms of moisture. And then even if you get, you know, like plop in an egg, eggs aren't perfect all the way through. So just kind of eyeball it to see how it's going. But this should be just a good, I think a half cup of Parmesan, a half cup of Italian breadcrumbs. It should be just fine. So all we're gonna do is I'm gonna give this marinara another stir. Cool. Aromatics are looking fabulous. Those are basically done. I'm actually gonna cut the heat. And then what I'm gonna do, it could not be simpler. I'm just going to grab a small handful, and I like to sort of squeeze it together. And I actually might need to add a little bit more breadcrumbs now that I think of it, because this feels a little bit wet actually. So I'm gonna rinse off my hands quick. Should be a bit more pliable or hard to manage. And so what I think I'm gonna do, if I can find it, well, I don't know that I can, here we go. Sometimes, this isn't in the recipe, but I did this on my last one just a little bit. If you add in a small amount of panko, which is a Japanese breadcrumb, they're more fluffy and they're just larger granules. And if you wanted to, you can add in another half or a 1/4 cup of Italian breadcrumbs, and it should be fine too. I've done that before, but I like the bite of panko. I think it makes the texture of it just a bit more fun. So I'm gonna do this quick, and then we'll start to make these balls. Also, Ruth, I'm sorry if I cut you off. Did you say that there was another question?
Someone was just interested in, well, first of all, follow up on the ricotta. You let it cool before you start the meatball process?
Yes, yeah, you want it to be cool. You don't want it to be warm at all. And it doesn't need to be like cold, but just cool. So once this hangs out, it looks like I have 13 minutes left for this to sit. And I'll show you, hopefully we're done in time. I'm sure we will be. You can squeeze it out a little bit to seep out some of that moisture, and then just transfer it to, you know, an airtight container. You could even do a plastic bag. You just don't want it to be hot.
And then the other, oops, sorry.
You're good.
The brand of marinara that you use.
Yes, I just used Trader Joe's organic marinara sauce. I'll show you.
Okay.
So that's a good one. And really any marinara works. Oh gosh, actually I do remember the kind of sauce I really like is pomodoro, and usually that's a bit more chunky. I just like the bite of it, and the flavor seems relatively similar. You don't have to use that. A marinara is just more liquidy and runny. And for this recipe, I think it is truly appropriate, but if you're looking for something to add a little bit more bite, maybe try pomodoro. All right, the texture of this looks good. It's much more dense, which is what I'm going for. And I just like to squeeze it between my hands a little bit to see if there's any air bubbles or any pockets that I can work out. And hopefully you can see on the camera over here. And then just give it a roll between your palms. And what you're left, I just think it's adorable. Are these cute little ricotta spheres. It's that simple. It's so easy. And when you're done, you just plop them in your sauce. That is making a mess all over my kitchen. And then that's it. So you let that cook for about 5 to 7 minutes on each side of the ball. And what I like to do, I tried flipping them with tongs, and that did okay. Actually, it did work. It just messed with the shape of the ball a little bit, and I wasn't super pleased on that. And so I tried another method where I just rolled it with a fork to the other side, and that worked just fine. I'm going to continue rolling these balls, but before I do, I'll place this one in quick. What I'm going to do is rinse off my hands. I'm actually going to pour in a half cup of Israeli couscous. I'm going to talk about that while I do this. So give me one sec. There is an kind of Italian pasta. I feel like I'm going to mispronounce it. I wrote it in the recipe directions on the email that's going to come out after this, but it's called, I think it's called Encini di Pepe, but they're like little pasta spheres. And you can totally use that. But what I'm going to use instead is Israeli couscous, which is a thicker, sort of like a pearl version of the traditional semolina couscous. And or maybe it's made from durum wheat. I'm not super sure. But this is, if it looks crazy, it's a tri-colored one. They come in just like regular color or sort of like these orange, pale yellow, and green kinds. The color is just ornamental. It doesn't necessarily bring flavor. But what I'm going to do is add in about a half cup of that to my broth. That's just on, it's been on a simmer hanging out. Nothing crazy. Pour this in. And you're going to let that cook for about 8 to 10 minutes or so until the couscous is just under al dente. And al dente means, it's Italian for to the tooth, and really that just means that it has some bite to it, that there should be some texture. And the reason we want to do it just under al dente is because when you go to cut the heat, the residual heat from the pot and also the broth is going to continue to cook the couscous. So if you were to cook it all the way to the texture that you wanted, and then cut the heat and then let it cool before, because it's going to be too hot for you to serve, by the time it gets to your mouth, it's going to be more mushy, and that's a consistency that you won't want. And so instead, what I think is a good compromise is to get almost there, cut the heat, and as it cools, then everything is going to come out perfectly. It's a little thing to pay attention to that I think adds a lot of pleasing aspects to your palate. So it's a lot of fun, something just to consider. And as that's cooking, we will separate out eventually our aromatic oil, and really everything's done for the most part. So, I mean, gosh, we accomplished basically everything in 40 minutes. I'd say that's pretty darn good, because right now all I have to do is sort of flip these balls when they're ready, and that's going to be done. And so the whole meal is really, ideally, you would use the ricotta for when you go to make the ricotta from scratch at home. It really is such a simple and fun process. And then you go to use that for your ricotta meatballs. And as that is cooking in your sauce, you're making some delicious soup in the background that couldn't be easier. Just, broth. You can flavor it up however you want and season it however you want. It sort of reminds me of, do you remember the chicken and stars soup growing up, like from, I think, is it Campbell's that make that? We had that, or I had that growing up every so often, especially when I was like sick or not feeling good or on really cold days. And there was some nostalgia about that. And I had a memory sort of hit me last week about it. And I was like, gosh, I kind of want to make, I don't know, like a slightly elevated version of that. And so this is kind of what I came up with. And it's really nice, especially in these frigid days. My goodness, this is so cold.
I have a few questions about couscous that have popped up.
Yeah.
So what is couscous? Is it pasta? Is it a grain? And then where do you get it?
Yes. What's nice is it's available at most just regular grocers. You can get them at like high-end ones where there's usually a bit more variety. But I got just where is it? Rice Select is the brand. But I got this one at Safeway. It was on sale for like $5. It's a giant container. But you don't need to go that crazy. The one that I usually get, it comes in, I think it's maybe a third of this size. On the package, it says Israeli Pearl Couscous, and I get that one at Trader Joe's. I think it's just under $2 for like a smaller individual size amount, and that does just fine. Couscous is not a grain unto itself. It's basically a pasta. And so it's just some, let's see what they use for this one. This one is wheat flour, and it says spinach powder and paprika. And I'm assuming that's just for the color because it's the tricolor couscous. Sorry, this ricotta meatball is not staying together. And then they just pop them out into these pearls. So technically it's a pasta, it's not a grain unto itself. And it's fantastic. I really like it. The texture's really fun. I have it probably every week and a half or so. It's just it's really delicious and it's simple and it cooks like crazy quick. Yeah, are there more questions?
It looks like we're good for now.
Okay.
So I've been singing this in my head since you said it, but isn't it Little Miss Moffat? Moffat sat on her top and eating her curds and whey.
Yes, yep, that's the one. I couldn't think of it. I was like, God, I know there's a nursery rhyme out there that has that phrase. And so when I was like going through culinary school and dietetics school, we were learning about the process of making, Muffet, about making the protein, the whey protein, and why like all the certain nutritional components of food and how that happens. And we learned that one of the products or the byproducts of making cheese creates whey. How cool is that? I'm gonna rinse my hands quick. Awesome. So all that's really left to do, I'm gonna grab a fork quick, is just to rotate the ricotta meatballs so that they flip to the other side, because we want to cook both sides with the egg that's mixed in so that it holds together really nicely. And so I just roll it in the marinara sauce so that it flips to the other side. You can use tongs, but it's just not as pretty. It's just a little bit. And the heat that I'm on right now, everyone's stove is a little bit different, but again, I'm at just under medium heat. And I'm getting those little bubbles that are in my marinara. Great. So while that's cooking, hanging out, I will say that when you go to flip it, the second side takes just a little bit less time. So I think we're doing about 7 to 8, maybe 10 minutes per side, like max. But you can't necessarily, well, now I'm gonna say it and someone will do it, but it's difficult to overcook. But I would say if you stay under 10 minutes, all is good on that first side. And because it, when you go to flip it, it's half of the meatball is already heated up. That opposite side is gonna take just a little bit less time. So it's probably only like 5, like for sure 5 to 7 minutes on this opposite side that we flipped it in. With the same fork, and like lick the marinara off quick, I'm going to check the couscous because I don't want it to be overdone, but I do want it to be right there. Also, if you've noticed, I'm covering the couscous with a lid, and maybe you can't see it. Whenever you cover anything that's boiling with a lid, that pressure that increases in the atmosphere of the pot, and like in the air, that helps promote the liquid, whatever it is that you're using, to cook more quickly. But with that same reason, if you go to, like, let's say that I'm heating up water to boil pasta or like broth to cook couscous, if it starts boiling like quickly, and it will because the lid's on, and I go to remove the lid and just set it aside and not use it again, all of a sudden now, because of that decrease in pressure, now the liquid will stop boiling. But if you know that you want to cook something rather rapidly, like I'm doing, I just, I'll pour in the couscous, cover it back with the lid, and because that atmosphere of the pressure inside hasn't changed very much, it's going to continue boiling. But if I were just to leave the lid entirely off, it would take like twice as long to get it to boil again, which is what we want to avoid. But anyway, I'm going to try this. We're pretty darn close. I think probably another minute or two, but just to save face and time, what I'm going to do is grab a hot pad so you can see. Shape. So this is basically done. It probably just needs to hang out for another minute or two. But I think we're good. I have here just a fine mesh strainer, nothing crazy. I think I got this at like a grocery store for $3. Use it all the time. And now we have our aromatic oil, and I'll show you quick. Can you guys see on here how it's not brown, but they're also like just a bit mushy, like the ginger is kind of mushy, the green onions are mushy. And so we're gonna, oh, there's the timer. Cool. Cut the heat for this too. Set off to the side, and literally we're finishing crazy on time, 12:50. It's pretty impressive. So I'm gonna pour this oil and the veggies into the strainer. Oh my gosh, you gotta smell this. It's so good. So we want all of that oil, and that's what's going to give it this really fantastic perfume and flavor. And then press out as much of it as you can. Wow. That there. Put that off to the side. It's just so like fantastically balanced. You have sort of like that citrusy, almost like peppery component from the ginger, and then that savory flavor and smell from the onion, and then whatever broth you want to use. And if you want to, and I'm going to do it because why the heck not? You could pour this into a bowl. But before you do that, it's always nice to have on hand, and I think like garnishes really do elevate a chunk of the meal that you have. And so I'm just going to grab a little bit of chives, just a small little pinch, line those up, and try your best to really finely mince them because they're tiny, and if you're on a live show, they'll go everywhere. Like they are for me. plenty. And just grab a little bit of those, pop them in. Gosh, how fun. And you have your adult, infinitely better version of chicken and stars. Instead, you have broth couscous and aromatic oil. How pretty is that?
Ooh, looks so good, Kole.
Thank you. I'm pretty happy with it. Our cheese is basically done. Would you guys like to see what that looks like in a container before we call it good?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm running out of hot pads. If I have any more. This is probably good. So let's set this off to the side quick. I'll show you the marinara. I keep saying that, I'm sorry. The ricotta meatballs. How beautiful is
Ooh.
that? And then what you
Kole,
can do,
what do you serve those with? Just on their own?
yeah, you can serve, I just serve them on their own. You could do a pasta, but you really don't need it. And so in my mind, I flipped that because it to me it was like just a little bit too heavy with the pasta. I did a trial run of this last week where I thought to put in just like regular macaroni noodles, and then I also tried linguine, and that didn't work. And so I think honestly, it's just good. Like usually when you go to a restaurant, it's just this. But I feel like the American version, you need something a little bit more heavy with it. And so that's where the soup comes in with the couscous, because it is a starch. It kind of leans into that Italian vibe a bit, but we're like flipping the script. So what you would do is you would just plate 2 or 3 of these on a plate, sort of drizzle it with marinara, and then you can put in like a garnish of basil, like right on top. And it's also going to help the flavor come out. And it looks heavier than it is. Like these balls, though they're like, I don't know, decent size, they're about 2 inches. They go down so easy. Like it's very sort of light, even though that it's hearty at the same time. And for me, like when it's super cold out, that's what I crave personally with foods. Is something warming, has a lot of flavor, and isn't terribly heavy, but it's also like nice and comforting. So we have our ricotta meatballs, our pastina soup, and the cheese, which I'll show you in just a second. You find a bowl. We'll do this one. My pantry is crazy full of stuff. Okay. So now, let me sort of shift this away. You know what I'll do? I'm just gonna remove this. Okay. Thanks for your patience, everyone. So now what I'm gonna do is lift up the edges of this cheesecloth here. And I don't know if you can see, I'm just sort of pinching around the top. So I'm making like a little cocoon of sorts.
Yeah, we can see it on the other camera.
Okay. And when you go to squeeze it, I'm just like, I'm barely doing anything. If you go too hard, what you'll start to see on the other camera, you see some of the cheese like poking through.
Will you lower it a little bit? Oh yeah, I can see it.
Sorry.
The ball. Yeah.
The ball,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
we can see it. It's poking through. Mhm.
Okay. So that's how I know that like I'm kind of on the verge of squeezing too hard. So what you could do, I like my ricotta cheese just a little bit drier. I'm kind of tempted to even not do this, but maybe it'll be fine. Because they can still squeeze it, and I'm getting out a decent chunk of that moisture. If I squeeze too hard, the ricotta cheese is going to poke through, and though you can still use it, it's just a little bit messy and cumbersome. So that's a drag. But I'm just applying very slight pressure. But for camera's sake, what I'm going to do, just set that in there for now. Move this to the side. And then you're just going to plop this kind of all at once into the bowl that you want to use. So I cool with this one. And it's kind of perfect. Wow. I surprise myself every time. And so very unedited. here is your ricotta
Oh,
cheese
wow.
straight out of the thing. I mean, you can see it makes like a good chunk of ricotta. So here's the spatula I use. And if you just give it, because it's still hot, or warm, I should say, it mixes up really well. So what I like to do is give it a quick mix, so that you incorporate just a little bit of air into it. And you can see how fluffy and creamy it is. And what's really fun too, gosh, it really, like, it's genuinely, it's hard to say that because like I feel like ricotta is ricotta, but if you make it from scratch, it's almost buttery. I don't exactly know what the descriptor to use, but it's so smooth and buttery. And I've been to restaurants where they'll give you like a side of like freshly made ricotta that's still warm, and then they season it with like a little drizzle of olive oil, a crack of pepper, and a little bit of salt. And you can just dip like bread in it or like spread it over like a slice of baguette. I'm already salivating. Holy cow! Like that is so fun. This in itself could be an appetizer. Just like cut up a baguette, lightly toast it, spread this on here with a little bit of salt, pepper, olive oil, maybe even like garlic powder if you're feeling crazy. It's truly so good, and it's so simple. Like you can whip it up really quickly. It just takes a bit of time, right? But I think if you make this in front of your friends, like it's sort of um, almost an entertainment aspect where they can see in real time how simple it is. The most complicated part, really, is just heating up the milk to about 200 degrees, and then the rest is, I mean, you're home free. So how fun is that? I will say that if you're going to store this in the fridge, don't add any. You can add pepper, but I wouldn't add any salt to this. And that's because if you add salt, what's going to happen is it's going to help encourage moisture to draw out of the cheese, and we don't want that. And so if you want this a bit salted, I would say only do it right before using. And yeah, that's it. So that's our class. We have ricotta meatballs, we have our pastina soup, and we learned how to make ricotta from scratch. How fun is that?
Great. Hey, Kole, I have one final question.
Mhm.
For the aromatic oil, could you use a combination of garlic, onion, basil, parsley, and thyme?
Wow. Yeah, so with an aromatic oil, it's just, there's no like right or wrong way to use it. The one thing that you want to think about is like fresh thyme is a really loud flavor. So if you go to use it, and there's also lots of oil in thyme, so you would want to use like a very small amount, and then also be really mindful about the temperature. If you use fresh basil, basil is a lot more sensitive to heat. And if you let it cook for too long, even at low heat, basil has a tendency to become bitter really quickly. And so like a lot of good, even like pizza restaurants will only put basil on after the pizza is done cooking, and usually not beforehand for that exact same reason. So if you're using fresh basil, you might want to do that like towards the end of the aromatic oil, and forget the other ingredients.
That's good. Well, it almost sounds like I've been trying to remember, what is it, Simon and Garfunkel song?
Oh yes, yeah, the rosemary thyme thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think you could use it.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Kole.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, and one thing, there has been a little conversation in the chat about how whey is apparently good for houseplants as long as you don't put too much in one particular plant. Apparently it has. I Googled it while we were making it to double check, and it seems like there's like pH. So if your plant's like low pH fertilizer, whey is good.
Well,
How much whey do you have left when you're done making cheese?
quite a bit. I'll show you. It's not the cutest color, I'll let you know, but here it is. So a good amount.
Okay.
I would say that is 5 to 6 cups.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, so a good amount.
All right. Well, thanks again for your time today, Kole, and thank you all for joining us. Can we get a look into the soup bowl real quick?
Yes, absolutely. I'll give it a stir so you can see some of the couscous in there. I don't know how to do this with all.
Oh, great. All right, that looks so good, Cole. I think I'm gonna have to try that tomorrow. I want to thank you all for joining us again today. We hope to see you in 2 weeks when we have our next Cooking with Cole. I do have a new program series starting today and continuing monthly, which is How Did You Make That? And it's talking to small business owners in Alexandria and the area. Today we have Apothecary Spices and the Alexandria Honey Company with us. That's at 2 o'clock. Other than that, please stop by the library sometime. We will be announcing our All Alexandria Reads titles soon, and we'll have some programming around those. So hope to see you all. Stay safe until then.
Bye, everyone.